So my story began a long time ago when I was probably about 2, was about as far back as I can remember, and it was that same year that my parents divorced. So I went to live with my mum and my grandparents, and I'd see my dad on access visits. I didn't really, I guess, feel very, what would you say, affected by it at that point. It was later down the track that divorce had horrible repercussions in my life. By the time I was 4, both of my parents had remarried, so things were good. I had, a couple of extra parents and felt really loved. But by the time I was 6, things had changed quite a bit. My dad was only seeing me at that point probably once every 6 months or so. And I remember one particular access visit, I went with my dad to see him for the weekend, and we had a really good time together on this particular trip. He was really connected with me, and I remember going to church for the first time. And I remember the layout of the church. I remember the details of having communion and being able to have the bread and the wine and feeling really safe in that environment. I remember going home from church that day and him sitting me on his knee and telling me all about my Father in heaven who loves me, and presenting me with a beautifully illustrated children's Bible. And I wasn't used to that. I'd never been to church. I hadn't known my dad as a Christian, but it felt good. It felt really good, and it made me feel really connected to my dad. So at the end of the day, we hopped back in the plane that he'd flown and went back home, and he dropped me off. And I remember getting home and just feeling empty. There was like a sense, the women tuning in, I'm sure, would know that that feeling of women's intuition, that there's just something not right. And I remember feeling that sort of deep in my guts. And what happened was my dad got in the taxi to go back to the airport, and he drove away. And I remember my eyes following him as far as they could before he went around the corner and went out of sight. And that was the last time that I saw my dad until I was 16. And there was no reason, he just cut contact. So in one day I had this, here's your Father in heaven who loves you, and then, probably 6-7 months down the track, realising my dad's not coming back. And so, that was really difficult. Around that time, I think, when my stepfather realised that he wasn't coming back, I don't know, something clicked, something changed, and it seemed like overnight I went from having a really good relationship with my stepdad to him almost having this hatred of me. His daughter from his previous marriage and his son never seemed to be able to do anything to get into trouble, and for me he was on me with everything. I would spend so much of the time in my room or grounded, just for simple things like being 1 minute home late, I'd be grounded for a week. No television, no friends, no phone calls, nothing. And I remember just going from this happy little girl to all of a sudden I have a dad who doesn't want to see me anymore, doesn't love me anymore. I have a stepdad who hates me for no reason and I'm not sure why. And then I have a mum who's also dealing with that same emotional abuse and who has sunk into depression and can't show me any affection. I just had no sense of connection with her. I remember one particular time asking for a hug, and she pushed me away and said, "Oh, no, I can't, I've got to change the light globe." And it was like, well, now I'm not even as important as a light globe. And as a child, you don't understand that depression saps your ability sometimes to be able to connect or to feel joy or engage in life. So to me, it just felt like she was present, but there was another rejection. And in some ways that was even worse. And so, pretty soon I was a kid that didn't have much confidence, desperately wanted to be loved, but socially had no idea and cues on any of that stuff. I was angry. And I was angry with my mum for leaving. I was angry with my dad for leaving. And I was angry with my stepdad, for abandoning me too, in a sense, and for hating me. And I knew deep down that holding that bitterness was not getting me anywhere. You know, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of definitely anger and fear just raging around. And I would look for affection and love in all the wrong places, and yet at the same time be so self-reliant and self-sufficient that I wanted someone to be close to, and I would be over emotionally engaged, but at the same time there were walls up, if that makes sense. To the point when I first started dating my husband, I wouldn't even let him pay for my lunch because I didn't want to owe him anything, you know. And then I met Jesus. And after the loss of a baby and a few other circumstances that just brought everything to a head, and when you meet God, something happens. The Holy Spirit does something in you that you are not capable of doing yourself. And I knew that I would not recover emotionally from the damage of my past if I didn't forgive. And I knew, because of the anger that I'd carried for so long, even wanting to let it go was not enough. I needed the power of the Holy Spirit to allow me to be able to do that. What was in my court was the choice. I had to make the choice to want to do that. Now, it wasn't until I read a quote on Facebook one day, and the quote said, "Sorry does not equal trust. Sorry equals forgiveness. Changed behaviour equals trust." And because so many of us struggle with that, and I was struggling with that, it enabled me to actually make an important separation and to be able to reframe. And it caused me to be able to look at my dad and say, okay, here's this adult that can't give me what I need as a father. What was it that made him that way? And when I considered his background, you know, being one of 7 children and a middle child at that, a father who was an alcoholic because he'd been a prisoner of war and probably had post-traumatic stress disorder, a mother who had to work to also help support these 7 kids and was probably exhausted most of the time, couldn't give him the attention that he needed, some other circumstances that had happened in his life. And all of a sudden I was able to look at my dad as a little boy and have compassion on him as a little boy who was lost and broken, just as I was lost and broken. And I was able to understand that we can't give others what we've not already received. And so my dad couldn't give me what he didn't have. A situation I had with my mum where I had instant healing and instant forgiveness in my heart for my mum. And what had happened was one day we were at a supermarket, and you know they have the little carousel rides, you put $2 in and you know the kids have some fun. Well, she was putting money in the rides for the kids, and the kids are going around laughing and she's taking photos. And of course, you know, this is another 10, 20 years on from when I was little, so she's no longer depressed, but she's just engaging with these kids, and she engaged with my younger brother. And I was standing there and all of a sudden this rage and this jealousy just came up in me, and I said, why is it that she could love my brother and love my kids, but she couldn't love me like that? And the Holy Spirit spoke to my heart and he said, Danielle, your mum was depressed and you've been depressed now, and you know what it feels like, and you've disconnected from your kids, and you've been the one with them, you know, screaming at you, Mum, 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 Mum. She's always loved you, and this is what she would have done with you if she was able, just as you were not able with your own kids. And at that moment I got it and I understood it, and my heart just flooded with love for my mum. And you know, we have a great relationship now, and you know, it was instant healing. Sometimes life isn't fair, sometimes it sucks, sometimes you get curveballs or things that are just unjust, but God will deal with that. Let him deal with that. Don't carry it around, because if you don't want somebody having power over you, the only way to get out from underneath that power is to make the choice to move on with your life and to say, you know what? Any situation has the potential to make you bitter or better. And what are you choosing in this moment? What are you choosing? Forgiveness is a salvation issue. It matters. It matters to God. It matters for us, for our own health, and it matters for the people that we love. Forgiveness doesn't equal reconciliation necessarily, but it does equal love.